Okay, as Caroline mentioned, I'm Dana Gibber. I am the Flowcarbon CEO, and I am thrilled to welcome all of you today for what is going to be a phenomenally interesting and jam-packed agenda. And we're getting started with aplomb. I am thrilled to welcome Annette Nazareth to have a conversation with me. Annette, as Caroline mentioned, is chair of the governing body of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, known fondly as the ICVCM. Which is an independent governance body for assessing the quality of credits within the voluntary carbon market. Annette has decades of experience in financial services regulation and corporate governance. She currently serves as senior counsel at the global law firm Davis Polk, having previously served as a partner at the firm and head of its DC office. She's been a key player in US financial services regulation for decades, most notably as a commissioner on the SEC, and as the SEC's director of the Division of Trading and Markets. So Annette, I think for starters, we're thrilled and honored to have you applying your considerable talents to this market, and also thrilled and honored to have you with us today for this conversation. So you initially got involved in the voluntary carbon markets 3 years ago through Mark Carney's task force on scaling the voluntary carbon markets, which then gave way to the work of the Integrity Council. So can you talk about why the work of the task force, which focused on what is needed to scale this market, then gave way to specifically to an integrity initiative?
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here. And I'm very honored and impressed that people came to the early sessions. I started in this whole effort, you know, as you said, my background was in securities and derivatives, and had never worked in climate or the carbon markets at all, and got one of those proverbial cold calls, in this case from Mark Carney, asking me if I would be the operating lead on a new sort of international study group, essentially task force, called the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets. And our mission was to basically come up with a blueprint for what it would take to form a high integrity carbon market. You know, obviously the thought was that if we could build integrity, that scale would follow, and that there's such an incredible power and possibility to the voluntary carbon markets in meaningfully accelerating our transition to net zero, that we really needed to start at base. What will it take to build integrity? And I know earlier the comment was made on, you know, there's been the narrative on voluntary carbon markets isn't where we want it to be today. We all know that there have been some issues. We've all read the same negative press. And that's really unfortunate, because I think where we are today is at a really pivotal moment where, again, after this very important international effort and coming up with the blueprint for what it would take, we are taking that forward in a very important way. And I believe that we're on the cusp of a very different high integrity scaled market. So there are a number of outputs from the task force, but some of the important ones were that we would create what was called the core carbon principles and an assessment framework. So we would basically define what are the characterizations of a high integrity carbon credit, which we call our CCPs, and also an assessment framework around that, because you know, principles are great, but you need to put them into action, and you need to, you know, assess and ensure that people are meeting those requirements. So that's basically, that was the first output. But of course, an important output also was forming this new international organization that was no longer just a task force, but rather a standing organization. And that became the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market. And there were a lot of things that we really focused around that, including our governance. It was really important to show that we were, you know, comprised of a group of, you know, very high-level people who understood the issues in this area. We also wanted to have, we have a board of 21 people, 3 representatives of indigenous peoples and local communities, which is absolutely essential, since the IPs and LCs are really in the forefront of a lot of the projects that were mentioned earlier. And they're, you know, the possibilities of the voluntary carbon market in basically using the skills of the IPs and LCs particularly in the global south is very powerful. We also had 3 board members who arguably are conflicted, but that really are important to have under the tent. So 3 members of market participants who are involved, including one who's here today, who is a member of one of the carbon crediting programs. And that's been very helpful because, my view has always been, we want everybody under the tent. We can debate and, really, talk about what's important here, but we need to have very frank and open discussions on all the issues. And we also have, as you can imagine, this is very technical, certainly beyond my technical scientific expertise. So we have 12 really renowned people with climate expertise, some of them scientists in this area, who have assisted us. So it's been a really fantastic effort, but it all did start with the task force on scaling voluntary carbon markets.
Yeah, thank you. And it's really difficult to overstate the extent to which the ICVCM and its work is so significant to the next chapter for the voluntary carbon market. So I think we all applaud you for your work and your leadership on it. It's incredibly important. And the CCPs, the core carbon principles, are going to be applied to assessing the quality of credits in the market. So the ICVCM is going to look at programs, which are carbon crediting standards bodies like Verra and Gold Standard, and then also to the methodologies that those standards bodies credit through. So different project types. So for starters, when should we expect CCP labeled credits? So credits are going to be CCP labeled, which means they meet the ICVCM's quality standards. And that's going to be something that all buyers and investors in the market can see and know with confidence that it's passed the ICVCM's rigorous quality work. So when can we start to see CCB labeled credits in the market?
Well, that's what everybody wants to know.
Yeah.
When? And they're holding us to a very short time frame. We are working apace now. We are in the next week going to start work for what we call a categories working group, which is a high-level working group that's going to look at all of the carbon categories that we've defined, and they will determine which of those categories do they think could be what we call fast-tracked. That doesn't mean that they get a full pass on the CCP label, but rather those are the ones that are likely, when we do the deeper dive, to be the easiest ones to assess. And we'll start that process very soon. The next level of categories or methodologies will be those that we think will ultimately be approved, but again will require more and a deeper assessment, and those we're going to basically assess based on current or anticipated market share, because we would like to have the greatest impact on the market in the shortest period of time. In addition, at the same time, as you mentioned, Dana, we're assessing 2 things, right? The carbon categories and the programs that issue the credits. And so the programs are, I believe at this point in time, looking at our application process, we created a portal, electronic portal, to make it easier. And once they have completed their applications, we will also assess the programs. So to have a CCP label in the market, you have to have a CCP approved program, issue a CCP approved credit based on the category approval. So in my perfect world, this would have been done by the end of this year. I think they're getting a lot of pressure from staff and others that they think it will go into the first quarter of next year. And obviously there's always pressure in the face of COP that everybody wants to come and show their, I like to say their new flavor of toothpaste to announce there. So while I'm not sure we will be ready to announce that we have trades going on at that time, I would hope that we would be able to show real progress in some way, including possibly having some forward contracts where we're able to show that there are buyers in the market that are very eager and ready to show their support for this
That
regime.
would be outstanding.
Yeah, that's the hope.
Exciting, okay.
Thank you.
Well, the work of the ICVCM focuses on the supply side of the market, project developers generating credits and assessing the quality of those credits. But the other major integrity initiative in the market is the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, known also fondly as the VCMI. Their executive director is going to be speaking here in a little bit. And the ICVCM announced a very productive partnership with the VCMI that aims to set one clear standard for end-to-end integrity in the market. So can you talk about the partnership, explain some of the primary motivations in partnering with the VCMI? It would be great to hear about how that came about and what it hopes to accomplish.
Yeah, well, I think we got a lot of attention for announcing that, we're working closely together. Actually, to be honest, I think we've always worked very closely and well together, but I guess it was important to the world to express that more clearly. We have a lot of overlap on our boards, so we work very closely together. We do coordinate a lot. And as you said, Dana, the great thing here is that we really, we do believe that we're creating end-to-end integrity. And what that means is the Integrity Council that I chair, we are focused on the buy side, creating the standards for high integrity carbon credits. We're also focused on the markets on which they trade. So being a former markets regulator, part of my, now we're getting to the fun stuff as far as I'm concerned, because we're going to be looking at things like trade reporting and registries and, the sort of infrastructure around the voluntary carbon markets to make sure that everything is sort of consistent with our goals on transparency and things of that nature. And then from there, the issue is, of course, the demand side. When is it appropriate to actually offset? When is it appropriate to use a credit? And as you know, the purpose of the voluntary carbon market is not to crowd out decarbonization. We all have to have plans for decarbonization and to meet those goals as aggressively as possible. The voluntary carbon market is intended to go that extra mile and say, I've reduced my emissions to the full extent I can, but what can I do to accelerate our transition to net zero by actually using the capital markets to invest in projects that would not otherwise have occurred, but that will result in even faster reductions and removals. And so that's what this is about. And so the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, or VCMI, is very focused on that. How can corporates be comfortable that they have met their obligations to the full extent possible, and now it's appropriate? It's not greenwashing, it's not a zero-sum game. It really is that additional step in getting us to net zero.
That's a great point. It's probably worth repeating, actually. So for much of the room, this is obvious. If you're in the voluntary carbon market, you know this. But if you're not, it's worth saying that the purchasing of offsets is in addition to supplement corporate decarbonization work. So the steps that corporates take are they quantify their emissions, they decarbonize. Most of them make commitments to be on a net zero pathway where they're reducing their overall emissions. And then it's the hard to abate residual emissions that are happening anyway. That's where offsets are appropriately leveraged. And so this idea that it's greenwashing and it's instead of decarbonizing is a misnomer in the voluntary market. It's inaccurate. And so with that, Annette, are you feeling optimistic about the market right now? How are you feeling about the voluntary market?
I am feeling optimistic. Look, I think, as I said earlier, I think we really need to change the narrative because I think the narrative is very backward looking, and there's no question that we've had issues in this market. Of course we have. We also have, dire environmental issues that need to be addressed. And so I think we have to have that optimism that we can address this, and I do believe that we have those building blocks to create a better future, and that we really have to do that. The other thing that I wanted to mention that was sort of related to something you said is, the benefits, obviously there are environmental benefits, and that's great, but there are also benefits with sustainable development and as is local communities. Mm-hmm. I mean, there is a very exciting possibility that we can use the capital markets not only to accelerate our transition, but to really change the lives of communities in the global south who have frankly been the ones who have suffered from what we have done, our regeneration and those before us in the global north. And the concept that you can bring this investment to the Global South and frankly create potentially a generation of what I like to call green collar workers who are now trained to work in these environmental areas, and that really becomes part of the economies of these communities is just such a powerful thought, you know, and something that I do have great optimism about.
How big do you think this market could scale? It's a market mechanism. How big can it get?
Well, again, I think we'll see. I mean, I think, you know, it was referred to before, is it 20 times or 50 times, whatever it is now? I mean, I hope, you know, as a former market regulator, I never predict the price or the volume, but I can be optimistic as a citizen of the world that it's going to scale up quite significantly.
Yeah, in a relatively short period of time.
Right.
Which is what we need to
But
see.
you know, that's what happens with new markets, as you know. I mean, you know, liquidity begets liquidity, we like to say, right? So once this starts to scale up, it could happen very quickly, and that's what you see in other markets. It could be a little slow getting started, and then, but from there it could really take off. The other thing I'd like to say, because I do think about this a lot, is that, you know, in this process, it's not going to be perfect, right? I mean, I think we have a wonderful framework, and, you know, the CCPs will be applied again to the programs and the categories. That means then it's not applied at the project level. So trust me, you know, all the critics will be out there, and rightfully so. Transparency is a good thing. It's painful, but it's a good thing. They will be looking at, for any project that doesn't meet our mission or goals, and we'll hear about it. And what I'm trying to make sure that everybody's conditioned about is, you know, having been a former regulator, I mean, we always had some issues. God knows you read about them in the Wall Street Journal every day. We always have issues in the securities markets, right? The one thing you don't hear people say when you have some defalcation, whatever it is in the securities market, you don't hear people say, we need to shut down the capital markets. This is unacceptable. They would never say that. So that cannot be the narrative around inevitable problems that will occur as this voluntary carbon market is scaling up and you know, moving towards integrity. That just can't be. It has to be, how do we fix it? And this is what the Integrities Council is going to have to do. We're going to have to take in all this data and say, is this a specific project issue, in which case we talk to the carbon crediting programs and say, you know, is there something you think you missed, or is there something you need to change in your diligence or whatever? Or maybe this is a project developer you don't want to deal with anymore. Or is it more systemic, in which case the ICVCM, maybe we'll have to think about tweaking our framework or adjusting the, you know, the assessment framework or something. The answer is not going to be, let's shut down the market. That is preposterous. And so I'm just preparing everybody for that now, because I think we have to be prepared for the bumps and how we deal with it in other developed capital markets.
That's an excellent and exciting perspective that you just offered, so thank you very much. And I think it's a very good one for this audience. So we, at Flowcarbon, we work a lot with those who are carbon curious, so to speak. They are investors or corporates that are looking to engage or considering engaging in the market, haven't yet done so. And so that's reflected in the audience. We have a lot of carbon curious audience members. And so I think it's great to hear that the key market infrastructure for scaling is being built now, and the ICVCM is a huge component of it. Is there any other signs or signals that you see of the market doing what it needs to do, developing the infrastructure that it needs to set it up for scale?
Oh, I think there are a lot of efforts apace. As you know, the World Bank has created a meta registry, which is, you know, very positive, again, with the thought of bringing together information from all the regional registries so that the important issues like no double counting, you'll be able to see everything in one place. You know, they're just, obviously there are a lot of exchanges that are interested in trading these products, and I think that's very exciting. You know, my view is that, you know, we'll continue to have bilateral transactions. ISDA has, as you probably know, amended their annex that relates to carbon credits that hadn't been looked at in 30 years, and they updated it and now are thinking about updating it further to reference the CCPs in the annex. But that was a very good effort because they spent a lot of time really thinking about what should the standard terms of these contracts be, which I think is helpful not only for the bilateral market, but I assume that that work will also feed into what a standard contract looks like on an exchange. But the other exciting thing is if we do start seeing more of this trading, more liquidity in these markets, I think we'll also, and you'll hear from Russ Benham this afternoon, and he's very excited about this, you're going to see more futures trading in these products, which is really helpful because it's going to set an important price signal, but also, these are long-dated contracts. So for the first time, you'll really be able to have a good hedging mechanism for these projects and for these products. And so I think all of those things, show that we're making good progress and that the infrastructure is coming together. I mean, the one great thing about the capital markets, the work on the CCPs and the assessment framework, that was tough. That was hard to do. But then when you tell market participants in our very developed capital markets, hey, we've got a new product that we think will be high integrity and that we think there'll be desire for, you don't have to prod them too much to get ready. As you know, those of you in this market, it's those entities are very eager to step up. So we are in discussions with them, but it hasn't been difficult. Let's put it that way.
Excellent. Okay. Well, with that, we've wrapped. But it's very exciting to hear between insurance and regulation and ISDA contracts and secondary trading. All of this infrastructure is rapidly evolving and maturing and being brought to bear on this market. So I think the next few months, years are going to be very, very exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annette.
Thank you so much.